Oh, hi. Welcome to another Tracking Trends Thursday with Kristen Mason Coreas, owner of the Homes by Mason team. Today is Thursday, July 24th, here to talk with you about what is happening in our real estate market. Interest rates basically stayed flat compared to last week. We're at 6.74, which is where we've been for quite some time, hovering right there around 6.74. That is a touch above the monthly average and a touch above the yearly average in terms of where we've been. On the higher side of where we've been this year, but frankly, again, going back for the most recent weeks that I can remember, this is where we've been. So that is relatively stable. In national economic news, some things are up and some things are down. Jobless claims fell and continuing claims held steady. So that's good news for the job market. And when there's good news for the job market, then interest rates tend to stay the same. Interest rates come down when the economy is bad to try to stimulate the economy. So that's kind of the good news, bad news is that interest rates come down when the economy is not doing so well. So if you want the economy to be doing well, then interest rates will not come down. So which one do you want? You've got to decide. Consumer sentiment inched up in July to the highest level since February. Inflation fears eased, although there are still some concerns about future prices lingering. The leading indicators do suggest the U.S. economy will slow down. So while sentiment is up, indicators say the economy will slow. Tariffs are expected to drive prices up in the second half of the year. Median home prices hit a record in June, a 2% increase over last year. Price gains were higher at the higher end of the market. However, in other news, so while prices are up, sales were down to a 9-month low in June, and new home sales also were weak in June. So some things are up, some things are down, kind of a mixed bag, which is why those of us on the ground of real estate, our heads are spinning a little bit. We're not quite sure where things are headed and where things are going. We are really kind of playing it day by day and taking it day by day, week by week to see what is happening in our market. For the larger Mid-Atlantic region here, showings have increased, a 4.1 increase from the same week last year. So no more buyers are out there. So that's good news. And new listings were up only a touch from last year, which that's an interesting trend because that's one of the other trends we have been seeing is listings up, 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 up. But after a surge this spring with lots of increases and high increases in inventory, now the levels are more comparable to last year. So not as high, only 2% increase compared to the same week last year. Now list prices are still higher. And that's, of course, the big number that people pay attention to. Interest rates and prices, I think, are probably two biggest things that buyers care about. So prices do continue to stay strong. They're higher than a year ago. However, the increases are becoming a bit more modest and show some signs of leveling off. So that takes us to the larger DC metro area, get a little bit closer to home. And here again, so we're up and down, up and down. I mean, almost in every comparison here, where we are up year over year, we were down week over week. So a little bit topsy-turvy here. Showings were up from last year by 7%, but down from last week, 1.6%. Purchase contracts are essentially flat, down a touch from last year, but up 18.5% from last week. That's a big number. What happened from last week to this week for contracts to be up 18.5%? Maybe showings were up last week. Now I can't remember, right? If showings were up last week, that would translate into higher contracts this week. So with showings down this week, maybe we'll see contracts down next week. And time to contract longer by 4 days from compared to last year, but shorter by 5 days compared to last week. New listings up year over year, down week over week. So down 16, and these are relatively significant numbers, down 16% week over week. Median list price, both of those things are up. So again, that is an important factor that people pay attention to. What's happening with prices? And everyone thinks prices are coming down. Well, the data is not showing prices coming down in general. So both from last year and from last week, prices are up 4% and 2%. Active listings up 37.5% from last year and essentially flat from last week. And so our hyperlocal area does look similar to the larger DC metro area. So the number of new listings and new contracts we had are pretty much right on average for the year. You can see that there. So we had less new listings than last week, but basically the same amount of contracts. And again, right on par with what the average is for the year. And days on market are up from last week, so longer, and interest rates are flat. So compared to last year, this is an interesting chart. So inventory is, inventory is the red bar, so basically flat. You can see last week it was up. The week before that, it was down. Inventory was down, and then it was up, and now it's basically flat. So that's what happened with inventory in the past couple of weeks, and contracts are up compared to last year. And what I find interesting here, if you look back, so contracts are the green bar, right? So basically since mid-April, contracts have been up year over year. I mean, I've been saying, and we've kind of been feeling in the market that there's less buyer activity, but this doesn't really show that. I mean, earlier in the year, contracts were down a number of weeks. But again, this shows since mid-April, except for this 1 week here, which was probably the 4th of July, maybe, or right before 4th of July, contracts were up year over year. So buyer activity is relatively firm in our area is what that data tells me. And then this is week over week data. So week over week, our supply is down in the hyperlocal area, which is what we saw in the DC metro area, and contracts are basically flat. It's not showing up here. So contracts were flat compared to last week. That is your Tracking Trends Thursday. And anytime you want to talk about how these trends may impact you and your decisions, please reach out. 571-210-1866 is the best way to get me. You can call me or text me at that number. You can email me at kristen@homesbymason.com or click the link down below to schedule a time on my calendar. Thanks for watching and have a great weekend.